Good morning. My name is Kathy Field Lloyd, and I'm the chair of the Juno Beach Forum. And the forum is designed to provide opportunities for condo associations and HOA board members to meet together and share information about best practices that are around issues that are of concern to us. We believe that if we have strong HOAs and condo associations, then our entire community is stronger for that. We are a program of the Juno Beach Civic Association, and I'm pleased to say that our president, Donna Hamilton, is with us today, and two of our board members, Kathy Dorn and David Cox. In the past, we have held our meetings at the town hall, but of course, the whole world changed this year for all of us, and so we went virtual. This is our fourth seminar this year online. And we absolutely could not do it without our partnerships. Today, we have our moderator, Chris Banker, who's a wonderful partner for us, and our sponsor, Kathy Dorn from Center State Bank, and our speakers, which you're going to hear a lot more about very shortly. This is our last webinar of the season, and we are recording it today so that for anyone who was not able to make it, or anyone who would like to go back and look at it again, it will be available on the Juno Beach Civic Association website. So thank you all for being with us today. I think we have some great information for you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to have you meet our sponsor, Kathy Dorn from Center State Bank.
Good morning, everyone. As Kathy mentioned, my name is Kathy Dorn. I am an association relationship manager with Center State Bank, and it's always our pleasure to be a sponsor of the Juno Beach Civic Association events and to be a member of the Civic Association itself and on the committee for the forum. Center State Bank is a premier association services bank. We are the 6th largest association bank in the country, servicing over 5,000 associations with more than $1 billion in association deposits. I'll keep this brief. If any of you have any questions or have any would like to reach out to me, my contact information will be displayed at the end of the presentation today. And I'll turn this over to Chris Banker with Patriot Insurance.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy, and good morning, Juno Beach Civic Association and the Juno Beach Forum. What a great organization it is. My name is Chris Banker. I'm president of Patriot Insurance Agency. So in my spare time, when I'm not moderating terrific programs like this, I'm busy presiding over what is our full service insurance agency. We provide insurance solutions for residents, for businesses, and for community associations throughout our town of Juno Beach and the state of Florida. I've worked in the insurance industry for over 26 years, also a lawyer and a member of the Florida Bar since 1996, as well as the bars of Maryland, the District of Columbia, and also all the federal bars. I'm a native Floridian, raised right here in Palm Beach County. I'm vice president of the Juno Beach Civic Association, a mantle which I hold in very high esteem. It's a pleasure to serve with that great board. I also serve on the Town Floodplain Task Force, and I frequently get the privilege of lecturing and moderating great programs like this. In my free time, I like to teach speech and logic at the high school level, and I coach football here for local sports teams. But enough about me. Let's talk about Steve Jobs. Well, if you don't know, the late Steve Jobs was the former founder and CEO of the Apple Corporation. And if you don't know what the Apple Corporation is, we're going to need a much longer forum, and we'll do that at another time. But if you do know, I'll tell you that Steve Jobs famously said the following. He said, "We think you basically watch television in order to turn your brain off, but you work on your computer when you want to turn your brain on. So whether it's the TV or the computer or it's brain off or brain on, in all likelihood, you're receiving the signal and the provider from the very same corporate entity, and how we get it there in a community association is the subject of today's panel. And in fact, one of the most vexing subjects that we've encountered in the Juno Beach Forum. In fact, it was one of the highest requested or most frequently requested topics for discussion, which is why we have the great privilege of presenting it with you and for you today. And speaking of brain on and brain off, we have two of the best brains in the business presenting as panelists today, and I'd like to introduce them now. First, we have Leo Delgado. Leo is the founder and he's president of Converged Services. Now, this is the nation's largest and most experienced telecommunications and technology advisory firms. He's got over 35 years in the industry. Previously, he was in leadership roles with some of the largest cable television providers, both in the US and abroad. So he has a lot of information. He's got a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting from the University of Florida and an MBA from Nova Southeastern. So won't you join me in welcoming Leo Delgado? Also today, we have presenting Paula Mara. Now, Paula is probably known to many of you. She's a senior associate attorney with Rosenbaum PLLC law firm. She's practiced in the general area of real property law for over 18 years. Paula attended the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She's licensed in Florida, Missouri, and Kansas. She's practiced in Florida for 17 of those 18 years. And throughout her years of practice, she's been primarily focused on the representation of condominiums, homeowners associations, cooperatives, and country clubs. So won't you also help me welcome Paula Mara? So we've got some terrific folks for you today. I want a couple of reminders. One is that we'll have some questions that I'll be asking, but also if you'll see that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you get to also ask some questions today. I see there's already one in the queue. We're not going to ask that one just yet, but we will get to it. So if you've got a question, type it in there. And as time permits and as the program permits, we'll be asking those questions of our panelists. But before we get to your questions, let me jump in and ask a simple question to get things started. And the first question will go to Leo Delgado. So Leo, you know, this whole area of television and broadband and internet can be a little bit confusing, but would you just take us back for a second and explain the different types of services that are available? You know, you've got Comcast, Hotwire, AT&T, you've got satellite, you've got resellers, you've got services, cable, internet, phone, all this crazy stuff. Do we have more or do we have fewer choices today? And tell us about those different types of services. Take it away, Leo.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with Juno Beach Civic Association and other folks that are on the call today. Cable television has come a long way. It came from basically having a monopoly in a local area, local franchise would be a city or a county. That changed about 10 years ago in Florida, where the legislature made it very simple. Instead of having to get a franchise per city or per county, to be able to get one franchise that can serve the entire state of Florida with one application, because it would take 2 to 5 years to get a franchise in an area, very difficult. The incumbent always made sure that it wasn't easy for a competitor. So that dramatically changed about 10 years ago. Now there is a lot of competition in Florida from the area. Satellite, obviously in Florida, we have the challenges of rain fade and all that with satellites. And we'll talk about the future there, because there's also a lot going on with that. So there are also what many challenges, the ability to especially in the barrier islands, to be able to run fiber basically underwater across from the mainland to some of the barrier islands, like some of your members are living in. But today we have very competitive marketplace. It's gotten better. The technology, the incumbent phone company, AT&T, in this area that we're talking about has come and gone, basically in terms of that they own DirecTV. They're trying to figure out a way how to get to properly address what they're going to do when it comes to video, but certainly on the internet. And also what has changed is it's not really about the video franchise. There are companies out there that are doing internet. So it has become a bit of a commodity, but there's pros and cons of the company that's delivering that service, because your residents and yourselves are depending upon having a quality signal. It's obviously everything has become very clear with COVID that we need a very reliable network. We need customer service. We need for the internet to be working 24/7. We need Wi-Fi to work in our homes. So a lot has changed, and looking forward to us explaining hopefully a lot more about that.
Great. Thank you very much, Leo. And Paula, sort of as a follow-up to you, let me ask you this question. You know, we hear a lot about these bulk contracts that community associations are subject to. Would you just kind of give us a ground floor definition for, from your perspective of what a bulk contract really is, and whether or not under this new landscape with new competitors, new marketplace, and the current environment, does the bulk contract allow for greater flexibility or less flexibility these days for community associations? How do you see it as sort of a ground floor topic?
Well, first, let's kind of break it down to that first layer. And what is the bulk contract? And of course, it's a pretty simple definition, right, for our board members listening today. And that is the ability for our board of directors as the association to administer cable or all of the other different communication services that are offered through an agreement which will offer the services to the entire community, to each owner, whether you're an HOA or you're a condo. And within that is the board's authority, first of all, to enter into those bulk contracts. So originally, decades ago, we would look to the declaration of condominium or the HOA declaration of restrictive covenants to determine whether or not that was defined as a common expense. So the evolution of 718 and 720 to provide that authority to the board of directors to enter into a bulk agreement, I think is fundamental to our conversation today, because everyone here listening needs to understand that under 718 and 720, the board of directors does have the authority to enter into a bulk agreement for communication services without a vote of the membership to enter into that agreement, whether or not it's in your declaration. So I think that's one of the fundamental pieces to all of this for our understanding of where does the association have the authority to enter into a bulk contract, and most importantly, charge that as a common expense to that one owner who shows up at the meeting and says, I don't want to pay for this, I don't use that type of service, or I want to get my own. So that's fundamental. And keep in mind also that owners then do not relinquish all of their rights to cancel that contract, because all bulk cable communication services contracts can be canceled by a vote of the membership, a majority vote of those present at a quorum meeting. So a meeting at which a quorum has been obtained to enter into those bulk contracts, they can cancel those by a majority vote. So keep that in mind. I think that's the fundamental basis for why we're here today talking about that, right? And I also believe that from the association board, the administration of the association, and we'll get into this as well, there are so many benefits. The main benefit is a cost saving analysis of the bulk contracts. I think that's why associations and board of directors determine it's best for their community at large to have this opportunity to enter into those bulk contracts. And I'm sure we'll explore this throughout the next hour on how that has evolved from whether it's just cable and expanding into the different now services that we have, the different choices, the competition has expanded, and also what do our owners want, and is there competition out there for all those different services? I think I heard someone the other day make fun of an older person. I think they were like 50, and the young person said, hey, why don't you go watch TV? And that was supposed to be like a slant to that person. Young people today do not watch TV. So apparently if you're older and you're still watching TV, that is what young people say. So I think it's just an example of how dynamic and how the changes are really happening so quickly with respect to what communication services we need to have.
I appreciate that, Paula. Thank you. Speaking of older people watching TV, I was reminded of the older person who fell asleep in the easy chair watching football and well into the night. His wife came and he woke him up, and he said, she said, honey, time to go to bed. It's 20 to 10. And he said, in whose favor? So, but moving right along, Leo, now we talked a little bit about bulk contracts. There are some options, though. What are some of the other options that an association might have aside from a bulk contract? I know there are marketing agreements and rights of entry and all of that stuff, but tell us a little bit about some other options to the bulk contract concept.
Would be happy to. Obviously, that statewide franchise allows any operator that has that license to go into any public utility easement in the state of Florida, whether it be in Pensacola or Key West. What they need through a proper contract is to have an easement into private property. So if you're in a condo, they have the right to be out in the street, or even if you're in a single family home, the same, but there is an easement that's needed for them to go into that. So one of the ways that the association can buy either on a bulk or through an individual basis would be to allow whoever provider has that license to onto the property and to compete with that. In order to, and the law also changed on a federal level, where now there's no such thing as exclusive service to the community. As long as you have a franchise, you have the right to be on that property. Whether or not you build out fiber and spend the money, it's up to the company to do so. So in order to the incumbents or even some of the players that are wanting to compete, is to try to get an edge over the other company that's on the property. And so those marketing deals are exclusive marketing, not exclusive access. They don't have the right to be the only provider on there if they're a franchise operator. But they're willing to pay. They're willing to pay, not only pay, but also treat the association as a commercial account. So if anything happens in the community, you have a higher standing to be able to call and get the services resolved as soon as possible. And then there's non-exclusive deals as well that also makes it. And we find those typically in apartments where there are two companies that are competing, but it's not always the case. There are some, it's an exception in the federal law. There are private cable operators, so be careful. And they will, they are not subject to that exclusivity. So if you enter into an agreement that's using a satellite provider, such as DirecTV or Dish, and reselling on a local basis, then they're not subject to that. So be careful, talk to your attorneys about making sure that the exclusivity doesn't hurt the homeownership.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because certainly we think that having appropriate legal counsel in connection with the
Absolutely.
negotiation of these contracts is absolutely crucial. And I'm going to have Paula comment on that in just a second. But before we get there, I just want to do a quick follow-up and say, whether we stay with the bulk contract or whatever the agreement that we currently has, or we move to a marketing or a different type of contract, how far in advance do you think the condo association, the board of directors, should begin the negotiation, the review and negotiation process? What sort of a guideline or a best practice that these boards can start to think about as they advance the renewal time or the option time?
Certainly, officially, Comcast has a policy that they are willing to sit with the association 2 years away from the expiration date. So they won't do it a day early. They will not basically try to do anything. However, the new providers, something has changed since COVID because of the need for reliable, cost-effective internet services. They are willing to start talking to the association way early. I mean, we've seen it as early as 3, 4, 5 years into it, because chances are the associations only have a video contract. It's beginning to be more and more every day, of course. So there's an opportunity for you to honor, and you have to honor the current agreement with whoever provider you have, but the ability to pursue possibly doing an internet deal. And then when the video agreement is up, you have an opportunity to negotiate with a new provider or the incumbent, or these things are all for discussion. So it is changing. So the thing to do is to review your agreement, whether it's up, a year from now, 5 years from now, because there may be opportunities to help the association perhaps deal with two providers, or actually let the incumbent provider realize that they do need to be dealing with you now rather than later.
I appreciate that, Leo. And Paula, as promised, I want to come back to you and ask you to sort of share with the group today what the role of legal counsel is, and perhaps more importantly, when that role really should start to heat up in terms of negotiating, review, etc. Is any time a good time, or is there sort of a sweet spot as we approach these multi-year contracts, or if they're not subject to a contract, role of legal counsel, and when is the best time to engage and begin?
One of the most important agreements as a new board, or if you're a new board member, you'll want to look at to determine when you can send that notice of cancellation is your cable agreement, your agreement for the communication services. And that's usually going to be a 90-day out window. So you'll want to make sure that you send that timely. You'll want to make sure that you send it certified mail pursuant to the terms of the agreement. So that's first. So definitely have it on your calendar, be aware of it, And don't wait too long where you're scrambling at the last minute to make sure that you're not then into your 1 year, your typical 1 year renewal periods where you have to wait additional year to then cancel it. So that's kind of first and foremost, pretty basic, right? Then ultimately, as Leo referenced, you want to give yourself adequate time then to negotiate the new terms of your agreement. So definitely give yourself adequate time. That's more of an industry question with respect to the adequate time. You don't also want to, once you've negotiated, realistically, and in my experience, most of the agreements come to our desk after the terms have basically been negotiated. And we'll discuss further about the things that I look for once those terms are negotiated. And it's always helpful to use a provider like Leo to get those terms and not go it alone, in my opinion, as a board, so that you understand what the industry at this point in time is offering, where you're going to get the best service, and where you're going to get the best terms. As opposed to going it alone, you're probably going to be given, sometimes we see a contract from time to time, an agreement that has less favorable terms than the one we reviewed just before. So be aware that put a good negotiator in place to get the best terms. Don't wait too long, and don't send it to your attorney when the effective date was yesterday. Asking it to be reviewed on the fly. At least give us. Yeah, Leo's shaking his head.
Yeah.
The last two I've reviewed, we've moved the date forward. So give us some time, at least adequately, to address back and forth the terms that we may change. And again, I think it's helpful to say a lot of the agreements that we do review, unlike other contracts, when we do change those terms, most of the time the provider comes back and says it's a no-go. So we know we can change and where we might push, and we're going to be told no anyway. So we let our clients know in advance, this is what we're going to try to do. But a lot of the times this is that one agreement where we don't have a lot of leverage to change a lot of those static terms.
So, and having professionals like yourself involved not only can help craft really favorable terms in these contracts, but it can really be cost effective. It's a cost benefit having the professionals like yourself involved. Tell us a little bit about why that is.
Well, I think one of the areas that I would point out is the distribution system and the service, basically the speed. I'll just reference it as the speed. That's a very important component where if something's going to go wrong, it's you've been promised a certain speed, you've been promised a certain level of service, and lo and behold, when the system's installed, and it's just not happening. So we want to make sure that we have protections for our clients when in fact that does occur. And you don't want to spend a lot of money on your legal fees to argue that particular position and get a reduction potentially in the cost that you will be paying now for the next 5 years for less than desirable product when you were told you would be given something else. I think that's one of the key components.
So thank you, Paula. Leo, let's take a practical example. And this comes from our attendees. It's a question about a specific association, and it goes as follows. It says, we still have 4 years left on an original 10-year contract with Comcast. We know rates have gone down, and many members of our over 400-unit condo association are using other options now. Comcast won't discuss renegotiation for at least 2 more years. Is there anything we can do? So this puts us right into that spot that we were talking about earlier with what are the options and what is the time frame. But that's a practical example, Leo. Go ahead and comment on that if you would.
Absolutely. Just to add to what Paul was saying, how critical it is for you to get your attorney involved as soon as possible, is because the most important thing is not the fiber or the coax in your community. The most important thing is the piece of paper, is that contract that basically tells the terms and conditions that you are under agreement now and what your possibilities may be to look at a provider. They will not walk away from our contract. There's no such thing as Comcast doing an early termination because they like you or you like them or not. It really is, the contract is of the utmost importance. The fiber can be installed in a matter of 90, 120 days. It can make, these companies are willing to pay for that. But it's so the other couple of things of the incumbent and why it's important for you to involve your attorney and the board to be involved is that some of you that don't have both think that you don't have an agreement. Some board a few years ago or the actual developer signed an easement agreement. So you may think I don't have an agreement. You do. You should get your attorney involved and request a copy of the agreement, because chances are you are in an agreement. You just don't know about it. And some of these are perpetual, when they were years ago, 99 years, and that kind of thing. So do involve the other thing the incumbent wants you to do is they honestly, they don't want to talk to you because they're hoping that that contract goes into an auto renewal. So they want to stall you, and they'll do it. Obviously, they are big companies. They'll live up to a contract, but they're not really that interested in trying to get something. They're interested in getting you to sign a longer deal. So one of the advantages they think they have, if there's 5 years left, is that a new provider is going to spend a lot of money on your property. They're not going to make any money for the first 3 or 4 or 5 years. They're going to make their money in years 6 through 10. So if you let the incumbent come to you and say, I'll tell you what, we'll do a 5-year renewal and we're not going to improve customer service. We're not going to service, even though they're doing it. It's not your best interest to necessarily do that. So I think that you should look at your contract. These are very valid. When the old days, when it used to be 36 channels of video, nobody paid any attention to these things. Now it's critical for people that want to be in Florida and have a job out of New York or Boston or wherever it may be. So it is critical, all these points. And then, so look at the agreement, have your lawyers or firms like us to look at it and basically see what, if anything, can be done. If you can wait or there's a reason for you to wait, great. But 9 out of 10 times, there's something that could be done to be able to get that.
Thank you, Leo. I appreciate that. Let me just give you one quick follow-up. We're going to stay with the bulk contract question because a lot of the attendees are asking questions about that, and a number of questions have come in with regard to the following. Are there any ways to drive or incentivize non-bulk access agreements into the neighborhood? Some of the attendees are asking that they're finding that a lot of the ISPs are pushing for these bulk agreements, but they won't add certain services to existing neighborhoods, et cetera, et cetera. So is there anything that associations can do either individually or collectively to drive or incentivize these non-bulk agreements into their neighborhoods? And then Paula, we're gonna do some follow-up with you in just a moment. Go ahead, Leo.
Absolutely. This is why presentations like this are important. You should be very thankful that the Juno Beach Civic Association is taking on this role because size does matter. And to be able to entice another providers not in the area to come to an area without any guarantees. At the end of the day, each board has to decide what they want to do. But if it's a group and we present it, basically we've used, say, for 25 years, used a concept called banding. So we band together unrelated associations that basically entices a new provider to come and spend $1 million across the interval to fiber with fiber and spend the 2 years that it takes to get the permits and all that. So banding together at the ultimate time to decide is going to be the individual board. But to be able to entice them, there's an interest in this area, in this community, to bring competition to this area. That's the only thing they really understand.
All right, Leo, thanks very much for that. Paula, let's come back to you. And the question exists as follows. Can a membership vote, can the board of directors vote to cancel an existing bulk contract without a termination option? So if they've got a contract that doesn't have a termination option, or if it does, what rights does the membership have to vote to cancel that? Or are they bound? What are the legal implications of those questions and those issues? We're getting a fair number of those as well.
Right. So initially I mentioned that the association members have a right to cancel the contract at the following members meeting, special members meeting, or the next meeting of the membership by a vote of the majority of those present. But once you've moved beyond that particular statutory right of the membership to cancel, then we're talking about cancellation of a contract where there's going to be damages associated with that cancellation. So I think there was a question earlier is how do we get out of this, right? That's the most basic way to ask that question. And my answer from a legal perspective is you need for your termination date and determine when that date is, make sure you're timely and cancel it in accordance with your termination date. I don't think I can come up with an example where I would say to a community association, here is the dollar amount value of you canceling it, basically breaching the contract, because the cancellation is your termination date. It would be you're breaching your contract by canceling it early, and you would, the association, be responsible for the damages resulting from that. So, and these companies would file suit if the association stopped permitting payment for those services. So there's really no true right to cancel. I can't think of, again, a breach on the provider side, which would be so substantial. If there is, we had a situation not too long ago, again, where the services were so poor that we were able to negotiate a reduction and resolve the dispute that way. But that was, one of very few I've seen where there's actually a substantial material breach of the agreement, where we're going to look at a reduction in services.
Well, what that tells me, and I think it tells all of us, is listen, be very careful when negotiating these. And once you're in, you're pretty much in, unless you've got some savvy renegotiation counsel on your side, like you, Paula. But let me ask you this. We're seeing 10-year contracts on so many of these. Is there a standard length of service contract? And is that time frame negotiable? What are you seeing out there? And then a follow-up to that is there a good service level agreement for service? And how do you attract that? Like, are there certain basic terms that you definitely want to have? And I realize that's a complicated can of worms, but really focus on the length of time that's available and how negotiable are those terms in the marketplace today?
What I typically see is I see a 10-year, a 7-year, or a 5-year. That's typically what I see. So I think that obviously it's in the association's best interest to negotiate the shorter term, but then that goes into the negotiation practice of it's maybe going to be more expensive. So all of those types of terms and negotiations are going to work together, and you're going to grind those gears down, and one is going to play off the other. So I do think associations may benefit because everything is changing so quickly. A shorter term may be worth the additional dollar amount you're going to spend for that. The other different items that we definitely want to look at is what occurs if the system is not, this usually relates to internet, obviously, is not as they promised or that the terms of the agreement provide. So we'll definitely want to make sure that we have the ability to, like the suggestion the example I just gave you, to renegotiate that particular term when there is a substantial or material breach of that particular term. But all that goes into the negotiation process. And again, my encouragement for the board of directors when you're in that process is to definitely understand the different points of the main points, and that would be the term, the services. That would be also different things that we're going to look at with respect to, again, the termination date, the service standards that the provider must provide. So all of those are going to play off each other. So it's a good question. If you're comfortable and it's a newer contract, then maybe 10 years makes sense because you're getting all of the new and modern services that you desire. But again, all of these things are changing very quickly. So it's really a shoe size, right? For every different association, you're going to look at your association age group. You're going to look at what your community members are desiring as well in that process.
Leo, would you care to comment on that, both as to the flexibility in terms of length of time of a particular agreement and or what you consider to be the most important terms that need to be focused on?
Absolutely. The issue is the investment that needs to be made in that community to upgrade the services, because chances are that network was built 30 years ago or 20 or 15. Typically it's done with coaxial cable, has been maintained over the years, but in order for, I wouldn't sign an agreement, or I wouldn't tell our clients to sign an agreement for longer than 5 years if they're staying with the incumbent, if they're not getting what is needed today. And what's needed today is fiber. Unfortunately for Comcast, they have 25 million customers nationwide. It is mostly coax. They can make a technical claim that they can deliver a gig over their existing plan. And that is correct from a technical standpoint. But it basically, they're also limited by the upstream because of the way the cable internet services work. They're limited to today about 30 megs going back up. And it's not a lot if you're working at home and you're working with large files. and all that. So that's something that can be a concern if you're, and again, they want you to renew short term because they want to put off building out the fiber until they absolutely have to. The other business decision they made is that they're not going to put fiber because they're probably a traded company. I don't blame them, and their stockholders would be shocked to say that we have to spend $20-30 billion to wire with fiber. And they do have a valid argument about the ability to deliver services and all that, and they are delivering. But it's not quite the same. So if you're going to get a new provider, they are going to need a minimum of 7 and more likely 10, because the expense of building fiber is quite extensive and large investment. So they do need time to amortize the investments they're making. You do need to have safeguards in that agreement. One of the things is a lot of us are streaming, in the video world, and video programming costs are going through the roof. So honestly, if you can get the right deal for 10 years, you have assured yourself that your programming costs are not going to, on a retail basis, programming costs go up 15 to 20%. That's one of the benefits of having a bulk agreement. You know, for the life of that agreement, what your costs are going to be. So if you have that, it's a good thing to have. I mean, that's a major cost. The other thing is we have to talk about fees. Unfortunately, because the local TV stations wanted to charge the cable companies a lot of money, that's another huge increase. You need to make sure that there's a cap on what you're, because some of these contracts will have a cap on the main service, and then they basically have, as the lawyer comes in, and we'll help point it out as well, is that they are, in our mind, they're putting in fees on there that are not really government mandated. So the broadcast fee is not government mandated. That's something that the providers, to try to protect themselves and to try to say, okay, we're only going to give you a 3 to 5% increase, but we have the right to add fees. So that's a critical point. And unfortunately, a lot of associations don't know about that and how dramatically those fees are increasing. There's a regional sports fee, that in order to watch the Marlins, the Miami Heat, whoever you want to watch, from a sporting standpoint, Comcast is charging $7.50. So there's a lot. So fees are important. They're critical. They need to be discussed up front before you sign that agreement. And there's a lot of other things that working with us, because we work nationwide, we have clients across the country, and with a proper legal team that you should be able to identify. There are limitations. There are things. There are associations that think they started with a great deal 5-7 years ago. They've been hammered over the fees that they're passing through. Obviously, customer service is of the utmost importance. Do not buy the cheapest product ever when it comes to the service, because you don't know what you're getting or you're not getting, and you're not getting the proper customer service. The call center may be overseas, and they may not understand, that it rains in Florida, and that the satellite has to, rain fade in the summer months and all. There's a lot of things that are. It's basically that what we find is that the board members are always very qualified people and volunteers. I'm sure they don't live in the Juno Beach area if they weren't successful in life. Some of them are attorneys, ex-attorneys, whatever they may be. However, they don't know what they don't know. A lawyer and firms like us, we deal with this day in and day out. And things are changing so rapidly that it's critical that they really let an expert help them, at least make them aware of what the issues are or we foresee in the future.
And I'm going to come back to Paula in just a second about those legal implications, in particular as it relates to wiring, who owns it and how all that works. But before I leave you, Leo, let me ask you this. It's the two areas you touched on that we wanted to get to. One is about wiring and the other is about fiber. So with regard to the wiring and fiber in particular, let's talk about fiber. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is, how it's different than cable, and what the typical installation is on a fiber deployment? What does that look like for a community association?
Sure. The advantage of fiber is there's no inherent limitations on that glass. It is basically light traveling through glass. And if the need for higher internet speeds, technology evolves, you do not need to touch that fiber. You're basically changing the transmitter of that light and the receiver in the home. That is a difference. It's not the same thing with coax. Coax and Ethernet cabling and all that work just fine for about 300 feet, 295 feet. After that, you really should consider, especially if you're getting into a new contract, asking for that fiber. And there are differences, and Paul will talk about that. Sometimes they want to bring fiber to downstairs closet. Sometimes they're willing to bring it to an intermediate telephone closet. But the ideal is to do it once. You know, there's probably can't predict the future, but fiber is going to last another 40 or 50 years at least. So why build or rebuild without it? It really makes no sense. Actually, Biden's plan that was announced yesterday about the next $100 billion to be invested in broadband in the U.S. is they're really putting an emphasis on fiber optic. There's a reason for that. Yes, we're going to have satellite internet service. Absolutely. Yes, there's going to be wireless, and there already is. However, at the end of the day, I think people are shocked when we ask them, you know, what percentage of calls go through a tower to tower. The answer is only 1% of that wireless. 99% goes through fiber. There's a fiber at the bottom of that tower. There's a fiber that connects everything together and all that. So fiber is really the key to the future.
Thank you. So Paula, when it comes to these fiber optic installations, wiring in general, let's just ask a basic question. Who owns these wires? Who owns these installations? And what are the legal rights and legal obligations that surround the wiring itself, these installations?
When we discuss that topic, we're going to discuss it. I'll discuss it in the terms of like your high-rise condo buildings, your condominium buildings, because they look a lot different, obviously. And the terms of the agreement, again, I don't know if Leo would disagree with it, but typically those are really non-negotiable as to who owns that wire, the fiber, once you get into a certain portion of the building, and then once you get into a certain portion of the unit. So those particular wires, and then your obligation to repair, replace, the standard would be once it's between a particular unit. Leo just mentioned sometimes they'll run it this way, sometimes they'll run it that way. And I do believe, in my experience, again, that those are non-negotiable terms, especially when they're running new fiber into your community if you're an HOA. So the goal would be to try to negotiate around those particular terms, but most likely you're going to have your provider owning most of that fiber running up into through the easements. You have to talk about easements. You also have to talk about, when we'll get into that later, subcontractors, liens, et cetera, when it's being run. But you're going to find that once it gets to a certain point, it's going to be owner owned if you're an HOA or unit owner. And then within the certain ports of the building, it may be the association, condominium association will own that wire and fiber going up to provide the service.
When it comes to these installations, if there's going to be a change, would that be considered, and this is a term of art in a lot of governing documents, would it be considered a material alteration? There are certain legal implications for material alterations in a community association environment, particularly a condominium association. But is that the type of approval that would be necessary? Would you comment on material alterations and installations?
In certain instances, so the basis of a material alteration for our condominium associations is you're changing the appearance or use of the building. Use would be if you're eliminating a certain common element, area, room, and changing that. Potentially, it could happen, I suppose, where you're using that for a particular closet for the provider's services to be routed through the entire building. If you were to install a satellite, then we would talk about whether or not that constitutes material alteration. But if the wires, the fibers don't change the appearance of the building, then we don't need to discuss material alterations with respect to the exterior of the building. There could be some limited instances that you could determine that to be material alteration. There could be some exceptions, even if it was going to change, you know, the service provider was going to install something that changed the appearance of the exterior of the building. But those are really few and far between. So most likely it's not going to, and you don't need to consider that as a material alteration.
So if that's not a material alteration, let me just sort of digress for a moment and ask you, you know, we are seeing more and more satellite installations and cell tower installations on the roofs of, in particular, of high-rise condominium associations, but some homeowners associations as well. would that be considered a material alteration? Is that the type of thing that the board would need to have some approval in order to move forward with? Can you comment on that as a cousin of the topic today?
Right. It's a really good question as we're rolling into 5G as well. So this question is popping up more and more. You want to take the most conservative approach. And in my opinion, that would be material alteration. And there's also some concerns from owners. It's going to be a political issue for your association as well, because there are many people who believe that the 5G can affect your health, just like many people believe they don't want to live next to a substation for, the electric FPL, et cetera. So that's not unusual. It's not an odd concern by any means. So that's a political issue that the association board needs to consider as well as they are approached, which I do believe will increase with respect to those 5G towers going on top of our buildings for service. So yes, in my opinion, that is a material alteration, and you will want to walk through that process if the board determines that it's a choice that they want to enter into to obtain that particular vote of the 75% to material alter your building with a cell tower, again, like a satellite, like I mentioned.
You mentioned political issues, and before I go back to Leo, I wanted to ask you this question, because we're seeing a couple of questions in that regard as well, and that is, what happens when you've got a split in your association where some folks want to go, a fair number of people want to go with more of a bulk type of contract, and others want to go with a different type of option? Do you have any sort of rule of thumb or any guidelines or tips? I realize these are more, this is more of a political question, but it's a real question and a practical issue that boards have to deal with. So how can you shed a little bit of light on when you have a little bit of a balance in terms of two different fully formed camps, and you're at a fork in the road in terms of which way to go?
So I always hate using that standard, elections have consequences, right? So the board of directors of your HOA or your condo, it is going to be the governing board, which again, under 718 and 720 can enter into those contracts, right? By their own board vote. But from a political aspect, you want to have your owners involved. If a survey is necessary to have a better understanding of where most of your owners are, we have a lot of snowbirds, of course. And their position may be, listen, I'm here for 4 or 5 months, 6 months out of the year. I don't even use the cable half of the year. So this is really unfair to me to have to pay for and share in the expense where, the other person's using it all year long. Of course, they want to enter into this agreement. But for me, it would be cheaper to go it alone. So you definitely want to have at least meetings, open meetings, be transparent, and understand where perhaps from a political aspect, where most of your owners may fall on this particular issue. But ultimately, again, it's up to the board of directors. And ultimately, at the same time, after that contract is entered into, those members do have the right to cancel that contract at a meeting, the next meeting. So from a political aspect, I think communication is key. And again, negotiating the best terms so that the membership has at least a favorable opinion of the terms you've negotiated. The last thing you want to do is have half of the association, not want the contract. And then, of course, that half of the association will spend a lot of time tearing apart the negotiated agreement and making your role as a board member even more difficult.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Now, Leo, hopefully you've had a sip of water and you're ready to go, because I've got a tough one for you. As you know, condo associations could be, an association, a community association could be comprised with as few as just a couple of units, or as many as hundreds and hundreds or even thousands of members. Is there a difference between a small association, maybe 20 units or so, and the bargaining power or leverage that they have to either attract or negotiate terms in connection with a bulk contract versus 100 or a 500 member association? Tell us a little bit about the differences where a smaller association, what sort of leverage they have, what sort of marketplace authority they might have, both in terms of negotiation and attracting certain bulk contracts.
Absolutely. Size does matter because of the investment that needs to, if the provider, either the incumbent or a new competitor, it does matter. It's going to cost them the same to get to the property. And if there are some of these providers, not all of them, I know, for instance, Hotwire builds their own fiber. Others are leasing a fiber connection or connectivity to that. So in order to get the speeds that we all are going to, already not going to, that we need today, they need to buy that service from a third party, and the cost is going to be the same. So in order to bring a gig of internet speed to your building, or 10 gig, it's a minimum of $3,000 a month. So if you're dividing that cost from 3,000 to 20, that becomes very expensive. When you're bringing it to a community of 500 homes, obviously you're going to buy a little bit more internet speed or capacity, but the cost divided by 500 or 1,000 or whatever is obviously a lot more reasonable to expect that they can do that. And this is why it matters to have to talk to your neighbors, to talk to the Juno Beach Civic Association to see, again, it's the individual board action for that community, but it does matter that you're able to get together and try to do that. I would tell you the way that Comcast incumbent does it is if you're less than 200 units, they don't really want to give you a bulk internet deal. They rather sell it to you for $90 a month, $14 for a modem, continued rates and all that. The bulk model always works. I've never, by the way, we'll have, and these providers will have town hall meetings, and I agree with Paula that communication is the key. We need to inform the board and the homeowners as to why this makes sense, even if you're here 6 months of the year. The math is there by far, because the average revenue that Comcast is $175 a month. Rarely ever do you get a bulk deal for over $100. So when we do the math for the association, we teach them that even if you're not here, some of them, well, I put my services on hold for and pay, I don't know, $8 or $10 a month for it. You're not getting your money's worth. Sometimes you can, a lot of the times, most of the time, you should be able to watch the video. So if your association is buying video on a bulk basis in Florida, anywhere in the continental United States, you'll be able to look, programming and stream those services to you. So you may not need that up north or wherever your second or your primary home might be. So the math is always works. We love to educate the board. It is a process. That's why you need time to negotiate a deal, because if you're doing it right, it takes about a year of looking at all your options, fulfilling your fiduciary duty to the unit owners, that you have in fact you're up to speed in terms of what today's potential competitive marketplace looks like, what pricing looks like, what's in the future, how can we improve it increases the value of a home. If the studies have been done by Corning, for instance, who invented fiber optics, where they've taken one community, one condo, and another one next door, and they can come up to a value of about $6,000 per home if your community has fiber versus your neighbors, and it is a selling point. In the rental world, if the cell phones don't work, the tenants walk out because they can't live without their cell phones. They can't live without their internet. So it is critical. It is an important decision. On the rooftops, one more thing, and 5G, that please do not give away your roof rights without getting either compensation or making sure, and Chris, in your case, they have to have insurance to that provider when they change the equipment. There is a liability if anything happens to the equipment or hurricane up there. So the attorney should be involved. Companies like us should be involved. The insurance agent should be involved in terms of all that. It is valuable. And you're not dealing with Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. You're dealing with an agent whose job is to bet that the board doesn't have competent, professionals around them, and they will take advantage of you. And those deals are 25-year deals. So it is critical. Please do not, just give up your rights to somebody who calls you and say, I can get Verizon on your building. And by the way, in terms of it is key what Paul said, communicating to the homeowner. I am not aware of any scientific evidence that says that 5G or any wireless communication actually has a health implication to it. It is just misinformation. And when we're involved, or no, you guys are involved, basically we bring the knowledge to the table. It's scientific knowledge that is not an issue. If you sit in front of that transmitter for 2 days, something could happen. But it's on the roof. What about the next door neighbor? So if your building says it's going to affect me because I live in a penthouse unit, if you have an equipment in the building next door, if there's a health claim, it's going to be the same. So that's another topic we can talk about in terms of roof rights and all that. But it's very valuable, very important to be done properly, that there's no damage done to the roof. If you have to replace a roof, how do you coordinate with it? What's in the agreement that allows you to go back and say, Verizon, we're putting a new roof on this condo, please move it. Well, that doesn't happen that easily. So there's a lot there. So we'll have another topic on that.
Yeah, I just want to chime in here and reiterate exactly what Leo said. So, the topic today, we were kind of talking about, bulk services, et cetera. But you're absolutely 100% right. Your rooftop is valuable. Do not treat the invitation for a tower as a minimal issue. You definitely want to have legal counsel involved. There are examples of towers on buildings. You gave the example just a few seconds ago of roof repair, roof replacement, and now you have a tower, and those terms and the rights and obligations of either party have not been included in a poorly negotiated agreement for that. So those particular agreements are a completely different animal, and you absolutely need legal counsel and others involved to negotiate the best terms for those.
Thank you.
One more thing, Bill, if they approach you, because they will, there's a lot of money in that business of having a custom Fortune 10 company come to you and sign a 25-year lease, so it becomes very valuable. If you already have a provider in there and you get approached, run to your attorney. We'd be happy to help you with that as well, because it is a big deal. Thank you.
So Paula, Leo mentioned something that I think is fairly important, and that is the fiduciary obligation that the board of directors has vis-a-vis their association. Could you tell us a little bit about what you think the standard of care is for a board of directors as they grapple with issues surrounding these contracts for services, the cable, the entire bundle of things that we're talking about today? What is the standard of care? How could you articulate what a board ought to do so that they stay above that line and that they are appropriately effectuating their fiduciary role?
So the fiduciary role that the board has to the association and of course to the individual members, it starts with the association board of directors, the board members acting in the best interest of the association. So layered within that, of course, is the board is going to perform any necessary due diligence to confirm that they've negotiated the best terms. They've reached out to the experts to confirm that the services that they will be provided, the length of term of the contract, have been negotiated, again, in the best interest of the association. And they're not just entering into the contract without performing any due diligence with respect to perhaps even negotiating back and forth or trying to determine what terms are, again, in these types of contracts, non-negotiable, or those terms that are negotiable. They have reached out again to experts if need be and received information. Outside of that, with respect to these contracts, it's going to be very difficult to say breach of fiduciary duty. The manner in which that would happen is if you have a conflict of interest or you've done some self-dealing within this contract, which we would not ever want to see. But typically these are pretty standard contracts. And again, the negotiable terms are there. You'll want to, again, in my opinion, use a service to get the best terms available to your association, even if you're a smaller association. And I also want to just reiterate, because I think there were some questions that came through with respect to amending your declaration. And again, previous to 718 and 720, providing the board authority, even if the declaration did not provide that cable could be a common expense. So there is no need to amend your declaration to enter into a bulk contract for this particular service. I also want to point out, I have seen association documents that mandate, that require the association to provide the bulk service agreements.
So the governing documents and the law in the state of Florida both work together to provide really specific guidelines on what the board can and cannot do. Would it be fair to say, though, that by hiring or by engaging experts like yourself, like Leo, in this process, that just by doing that, you have pretty much met the standard of care? That is the first and major step in doing so.
Yeah, and I believe that generally I can answer many questions that way for our volunteer. Again, I always say volunteer board members, because the hesitation to engage an expert or the hesitation to engage a professional to obtain additional information, even if it comes at a small cost or a cost, is wise, because it shows you're performing due diligence to make the best decision in the best interest of the association. So that doesn't only apply to this particular area, but all areas where you have questions with respect to how do I handle this issue, right?
So I'm not sure it's a fair question, but we got a handful of them, and that is there any idea, is there any way that either you or Leo could talk about kind of your scope of services, and that is including cost? And that was a question that was asked, like Leo, for example, do you charge to review a contract? Does your company, how do you operate? How do you engage with the association in terms of providing your services? And then at least one question asked how much that costs. You could certainly answer that offline if you would prefer. I know we're going to be providing contact information for both you and for Paula when at the end of the seminar today. But in the meantime, how do you engage, and when does the cost kick in? And Paula, if that's appropriate for you to address as well, feel free to do so. Leo?
So we've been in business for 24 years, so we have the luxuries of being able to work completely on a contingency basis. And we, first of all, Florida is our home, even though we have customers in 46 states. We have a lot of years of working with law firms and associations, management companies and all that. So we get involved, we help out whenever, but typically we get engaged. There's a contract signed. It says that we work completely on a contingency basis. Sometimes we spend a year, 2 years without any compensation, until at the end of that process, the board decides to accept, the proposal from one of the providers we brought. In the industry, typically, because it's become a very competitive market, the value of the contract is very important to any of the providers, your incumbent provider. So it is a normal in the industry to provide some compensation for that contract. Sometimes it's called key money, it's called bonus money, it's called 3 months of service, whatever it may be. There should be compensation along with the best possible terms and conditions. Service level agreements in an agreement are critical, and also price. It's not just price of being the cheapest, but having the best value. What does that company bring to the table? So if that happens, and only if that happens, the association gets paid first for that, and typically within 90 days of contract signing, upon activation of the new service. And if in fact there is some monetary value paid to the association, we will send you a bill for 25% of that. The association keeps 75% of that. In the meantime, they use our expertise. And key to us that it's different than some of the people that are doing this, or some of the companies that are doing this. We started this whole concept 24 years ago, but we do have people out there that are, but it's not the same. We have a team of 12 people. We have engineers, because regardless of what any providers tell you, it is a construction project to bring fiber to the community, which means something is going to go wrong. So typically some other firms do not get involved. We're in it for the life of the agreement. If you sign a 5-year agreement, we're there for you for no additional benefit for 5 years. We're there for 7 years. We're for 10 years. There are communities that over the last 25 years that we've done 4 or 5 times, based on the fact that we think long-term, we care about the industry. I've been in this for 38 years. And unfortunately, there are some bad actors out there. So we want to make sure we ensure that we have the long-term benefit and the benefit of being able to be called at any time, even years later. If everything went great during the construction, but there's a change in technology, we're there. So that's how our firm works, and it has worked for us very, very well.
Paula?
Thank you. So from our perspective, cable contracts, while they're not easy to review, we're going to basically look or key components. And unlike just a regular construction contract where I typically take a pretty bare bones agreement from a contractor, right? I then will add an addendum, which is several pages long. That's not how we review the cable. I keep referring to it as cable contract, but the bulk agreements. Typically for a bulk agreement, we're going to receive that. It's been negotiated. The terms have been negotiated. I'm not working with my board of directors to negotiate different terms that have been left off the negotiating table through the review process or the addendum process. We're looking to make sure that we are going to confirm that the insurance requirements are in the agreement. They always are, but we're going to confirm that, right? We're going to make sure that subcontractor lien rights, et cetera, are in the agreement with respect to how those are released. We're going to make sure that there are service standards, how the provider must meet those service standards, what happens when they don't, what type of easements we have to look into with respect to that new fiber, how that works, who's going to potentially remove it when the contract is over, those types of things that we'll kind of check the list off of our review of that agreement. And that's essentially because even if we change a couple terms here or there, when we try to negotiate terms after we've received that agreement, most of the time the provider comes back and says, we're not changing that, and it's not negotiable. So our review of that agreement is usually really limited, typically 1 or 2 hours, 2 hours. Our involvement comes in when something goes wrong, as Leo mentioned, when something goes wrong with respect to the installation or other issues pop up with respect to even associations, sub-associations, things like that between two different entities. And that's where our involvement comes in. And at that point in time, the association should engage legal counsel to work through any development of problems that come into play during, as Leo mentioned, it turns into a construction project. And with all construction projects, we all go into it as parties with the intention that everything is going to go as planned, but there's always usually something that comes up that then you'll want to engage legal services. But as far as the review of the agreement, in my experience, it's pretty limited with respect to any time consumed going back and forth with different terms in the agreement. They're pretty standard. We just make sure that they're there to protect the association.
And speaking of terms, a couple of terms that we keep getting questions about. One is there anything that can be done about the annual increase, the percentage of annual increase in terms of pricing? Is that something that's a negotiable term, or is that a sort of a take it or leave it from your perspective? Also, caps on fees or caps on increases, are these negotiable terms, or typically are those pretty standard and firm? And that's for Paula, and Leo can follow up.
They can be negotiated. I'll kind of defer to Leo on this because the negotiation part really it does fall more in his square. But they can be negotiated. Everything can be negotiated. I don't see that it's one of the stronger points the association has. But again, I think that the length of the contract, I saw a couple of questions. The length does make an impact on what other terms are negotiable to reduce the cost.
You're not negotiating for one item. I agree with Paul. You're negotiating for a whole bunch of terms, but you need to understand that it's really not about inflation when it comes to the cost of what's going up for the provider. It is all of the video costs. This is why some cable companies no longer do video. And some of you have asked about why bulk is a good deal, and we're going to address that in a minute. But it basically costs of programming. Whenever ESPN signs the NFL or any of these superstars gets $1 billion or $500 million for playing baseball. By the way, they deserve it. I'm not saying they don't, but that cost gets paid by us, the consumer, at the end of the day. That's how it happens. ESPN is now used to be pennies years ago. To a provider, it's $7 or $8 a month per customer to have. You have to carry all the ESPN channels because they have a lot of market power. And then the local broadcasters also have, the cable companies have to negotiate to pay for the local TV station, the local CBS, NBC in Palm Beach County or any other county, Martin County, or wherever some of you are at, anywhere in the U.S. Those costs, and those are 3-year deals. Every 3 years, there's dramatic increases by local TV stations. So it's not the cost of labor, it's not the cost of gas, it's not CPI, is the cost of the video programming. Honestly, the cost of the internet should be going down. And that's how they make it up. They like to do an increase that is nominal, and yes, they're all negotiable. 2 to 5. It also depends on a lot of different things, terms and everything else. But it is negotiable. But at the end of the day, it's the cost of programming that's killing them, the providers. AT&T has pretty much, they will be coming. So like, we can talk about streaming. I see a lot of questions on streaming. AT&T currently is not doing bulk video deals. They are coming back at the end of this year or early next year, because everything will be streamed. You will no longer need a satellite dish on your rooftop. It will come through the internet fiber, hopefully, because that's the way it's going to happen because of programming price. Even though AT&T ironically owns CNN, they own all the Turner channels, they own HBO and all that. So basically, and the same thing with Comcast, they own the programming. So therefore they're negotiating with themselves. They don't mind increasing the rates that they're getting from everybody else, and they get to pass it to the consumer. So
Leo, I'm sorry, go right ahead. Finish your answer.
No, it's critical that there are caps. And by the way, hopefully there's no caps on the internet, the amount of bandwidth that you can break down every month, because some of these companies are also charging additional money, such as Comcast and others.
So I think one of the things that is frustrating to the general public, to the board of directors in particular, is we're negotiating contracts that span over 3, 5, and in some cases 10 years. 10 years. And that's at the same time that technology, just as you mentioned, is changing and evolving, coming faster. Services are changing. I mean, almost on a monthly basis, certainly on a yearly basis, if not monthly. It's happening very, very fast. So we're negotiating contracts and terms over a 10-year period when the technology doesn't look anything like it looks at the time that you're negotiating it by the time that the contract matures. So what can you tell us about that? What do we do about the tension between negotiating terms today for technology that might even be obsolete, if not in some cases dramatically different at the end of that contract period or during the pendency of that contract?
We call it, we want to negotiate. Your attorney will do the legal part. We'll do the technical part of it. We want an evergreen contract with you. And when we first went to them with that concept, they're like, are you crazy? What's an evergreen agreement? It's saying that we're not going to be talking to you with day one, and then we have to wait until the 10th year to talk to you in terms of changes in technology, evolution of technology, costs, things that the makeup of the community might have switched to the point where people don't even want to go to video deal anymore. They want to be able to watch, whatever they want, whenever, 3 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon, wherever they are in the U.S. or the world. So therefore, it's critical that within bounds, right? You can't get everything you want, but you put in things in a contract that says we have the right to sit with you every quarter. You're going to bring your technical standards. You're going to bring your customer service. How we doing? What can we change? At best case scenario, worst case scenario, we call it a midterm clause. It says midterm through the agreement, we're going to have a formalized process that said if the world has changed, and by the way, it will change its technology, absolutely, then we have the right to negotiate. Now, they're going to want some assurances they're going to stay on the property. There's going to be a give and take. There may be some additional costs on things that might have evolved because none of us have a crystal ball. So that's the key. It's basically because none of these providers, in my opinion, are going to lie to you. What they're going to fail to do for you is commit omission. They don't want you to know too much because if you don't know, you won't be asking for these things. If you have experts on your side, you will be asking for it. It depends on what you're negotiating with, 20 units or 2,000 units. There's a lot more flexibility and more units here.
Yeah, having experts with you really levels the playing field and allows you to have some additional bargaining power when it comes time to review those things. Paula, do you care to comment on the advancing technology, the rapidly advancing technology, and its juxtaposition with long-term bulk contracts?
No, I think that Leo really just pointed out a really good point, and that is knowledge is power, right? So going into these particular negotiations, if you are going to be at a disadvantage, it's because you're not informed of the changes in the industry, what to ask for, what you're entitled to get, and how, again, these components work together with respect to negotiating in the future if you're going into something beyond a 5-year agreement. That I suppose would be the benefit of the 5 years, that you're not going to be in flux with respect to the 6th, 7th, 8th year if you're in a 10-year agreement for all the changes that we can all anticipate and pretty much guarantee are going to occur. But I think the key takeaway point there is having the experts on your side is really the association where you want to put your association with its best foot forward to negotiate these particular terms. Because as Leo mentioned as well, they're not going to lie or mislead. They're just not going to provide the information that's necessary to make the best agreement, to negotiate that best agreement.
You know, we have a number of sort of miscellaneous questions that I'm going to ask, but before I get to those, I want to let the panelists know that coming up, we're going to have an opportunity for you to each ask each other a question or two to see if there's anything that you would like to have discussed prior to closing today's program. So Leo, I have one of our attendees was commenting on the size differential between large associations and smaller associations in terms of membership. And they've taken the position that Comcast and AT&T both really refused to negotiate bulk at the 50 member or below point. Is that still the state of the marketplace? Is that going to change? What is your opinion on that?
That's arbitrary on their point, on their part. There's nothing magical that says 25, 100, or 200 units. They just wish not to do it because they know that you're less likely to go to a competitor because a competitor can't afford to spend thousands down your community and, you know, serve 20 units. Now, if they're serving the community next door or a couple miles on the street and all that. So again, that's what was key, that we band together properties in an area. If you typically, I've been told it costs $1 million to cross the intercoastal. So if you're on the beach side, good for you, but it becomes difficult. So it is important that the groups such as working with it today basically gets together and see what's possible. So things can be done even for something. Now, if you're isolated in an island and it's only 20 units. Then it is difficult to get there. Can it be done? Yes, but there's a case of a very, very expensive piece of real estate in Miami Beach called Fisher Island, and they have horrible service, even though they're multi-million-dollar homes there. But you have to get on a ferry to get to that island off of Miami Beach. So it is about location. It is what fiber is there, what can be creative. Rural areas are, but I realize we're not dealing with rural area here, or getting finding some help to do that. So there's ways to at least look at it. There's nothing to be lost over the fact that you're in 20 units. If you're 20 units on an island, it's gonna be tough. If you're 20 units and you have a lot of neighbors, it can be done. It can be done.
Paula, there was a specific question. You sort of addressed this earlier in some of your other comments, but I'd like to read it because it's to me a little bit interesting. And if you've already answered it, I think it bears repeating. And it comes from one of our attendees whose board is asking whether they have the authority to enter into a bulk agreement, even though their declaration may or may not provide for it. Are they required to amend their declaration before they move forward with a bulk agreement, or can they simply do that without having it present in their governing documents?
So let me refer to the good old days before 718 and 720 was amended to specifically provide the authority to enter into bulk agreements. Prior to those amendments to both statute sections, the association would need to amend the declaration, would have needed back then to amend the declaration to provide the authority of the board to enter into a bulk agreement if it didn't already have the authority within the declaration. And of course, an amendment to the DEC is a vote of the membership. So the legislature saw the wisdom in amending 718 and 720 to provide the board authority, even if your declaration doesn't provide it. Then the statute indicates that the association does have the authority to enter into a bulk agreement. for the communication services. And the safety net for that, when it decided to amend 718 and 720, was that it gave the members the ability, again, at the next annual members meeting or special members meeting, to vote to terminate that agreement. So the owners do have a veto power, if you would like to describe it as that, to terminate the agreement at that next members meeting. And that provides also, if you're a developer, when you have an association, I probably don't expect any of our listeners today to have a turnover type of event occurring for their association. But again, a very important event is turnover. You definitely want legal counsel, because if the association developer has entered into a bulk agreement, the opportunity to cancel that agreement exists, but it exists again at that next special members meeting by a majority vote of a quorum present can vote to cancel that developer agreement.
Paula, speaking of association meetings to consider these issues, do you make yourself available to the associations to attend meetings where these issues are being negotiated, to provide oversight and have questions asked and answered of you during that process?
Absolutely. And I think, again, if you have a political or there's some controversy among the members as to whether this is a favorable agreement or whether it's even a desired agreement to enter into, have legal counsel available. We make ourselves available, and it does ease both the board of directors from their point of view, and the communication, again, is key. Have someone like Leo, who has negotiated on behalf of the association, present as well, so everybody understands what the terms of the agreement are, the benefits negotiated. And again, if there's any legal questions, because that question that you just asked comes up all the time, and somebody in the membership may not understand that the board has the authority. So we don't want to create any additional controversy by misunderstandings.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned politics, because I bought a secondhand television recently, and I didn't realize it, but I had it on one channel and it was broadcasting both C-SPAN and the Home Shopping Network at the same time. And I ended up buying a congressman. That was to make sure everybody is still awake. Thank you very much, Paula. Leo, real quickly for you. This is sort of one of these miscellaneous bucket questions. You know, associations who do not have fiber, but they like the idea, how do they find out whether fiber providers are even available in their area and exactly how close they are? And as a follow-up to that, there was another question that asked, if we have fiber and we end up changing providers, even though they might own the installation, can the next provider simply use what has been installed, or does it get pulled out and reinstalled? How does that work? So how can we find out if fiber is available, and what happens once we make a change with regard to the installation? And then we're going to start to wrap things up, and I'm going to invite the panelists to ask each other any questions that they think might be of assistance. Leo, on fiber.
Great. You'll tell me later how much a congressman is these days, how much it costs, but we'll talk after this call. So the fiber basically once installed, it belongs to that company. However, another second, third provider down the road is willing to, because it's that contract that allows the right to be in a property, in the matter we've been discussing. So it always belongs to them. Rarely ever can somebody else use that fiber. We happen not to be proponents of having an association pay for fiber, because you're in the association business and looking after your, so that fiber has to be maintained, upgraded, the transmitter and receiver, all that kind of stuff. So there are some companies that will tell you that, they'll sell you the fiber. Be careful, because again, you're not in the fiber or telecommunications business. So when it gets installed, it doesn't get removed, and I'm sure Paul is going to make sure that there's a language in the agreement that if you do remove it, then you have to bring the whatever damage you have to correct whatever damage has been done. So there's a lot to do with that, but they don't typically like to take that out for the risk as we talked about, and also they want to serve because there may be additional services on the road that they don't know. In terms of knowing who's where, that's a secret for the company. They don't want their competitors to know where their fiber is. But if asked, they'll tell you whether or not your property, and we'll be happy to send you information on the providers. Or you can call us. We'll be happy to tell you who's in the area, who's thinking of going to your area, who could potentially be interested in all that. but they don't like to share that. They don't put that on their website because they don't want their customers to, their competitors to figure out where they are, where they're going, what the capabilities are. Hopefully that answered everyone.
It did. Thank you, Leo. We've got about 5 minutes left. So Leo, I'm going to invite you to ask Paula to comment upon anything that you think might be beneficial that perhaps we didn't cover. We covered an awful lot today. And then Paula, I'll give you a chance to reciprocate before we start to wrap things up.
So Paula, obviously you've dealt a lot with this. Without naming names, we don't need to know the association name of your client, but what is the most atrocious issue that you've seen in customer service or in dispute or anything like that, where because I bet there've been more than one that after either installation, there's been a challenge and all that. What's not common, but what is very things that could happen as a result of not having done their due diligence?
I think the most common, I'll call it, complaint that we hear after the terms have been negotiated, the contract has been entered into, the services have been now provided, is the connectivity, the speed. That is what I hear the most, where they have been promised something verbally, in a sense, and perhaps the terms of the agreement have touched upon it, but it's actually not happening. And then it goes to customer service because it's a large threshold for the association to get over to actually show that what has been told would be provided is actually not occurring. So that goes on for months and months and months, and becomes a boiling point before they can get the attention of the provider to actually recognize A, that their complaint is valid and true, and then B, actually we could determine it's a material breach, and they'll actually, again, most of the time, they'll reduce, instead of actually fixing it, they'll reduce the contract price to some degree. It's most common that I see.
And Paula, as we start to wrap up, anything that you would like to have Leo comment on, or any questions that you think he might be able to address, just sort of to round things out here for the benefit of our attendees?
Right. I think for our attendees, maybe just expand, you mentioned the evergreen, and expand on the association's ability to incorporate a term, negotiate a term, if you have a lengthier contract, that 10-year contract. Because I have a lot of questions that come our way where it's, A, can we cancel it, or can we renegotiate at this point in time because things have changed since 5 years ago. So maybe just expand upon the importance of that key component in a longer term contract for our listeners so that they understand that's one of the things that is probably one of the more important negotiation terms moving forward from today's date and into the future.
So the providers they don't want to have their hands tied. They literally wanted to tell you, we're bringing 10 gig to your property. What does that mean? So does that mean that my homeowner is going to get 10 gig, or at 2 in the morning, that 10 gig is going to be available for them? So things have to be defined. The other big issue is Wi-Fi. We expect, we all have wireless devices, and we expect them to work. And we don't want to hear that I need to be plugged in order to get the speeds that we were promised in the contract. So Wi-Fi does matter. And they dance around all the time, and they want to provide, it's available 99.996, whatever. Well, that 0.004 of difference makes a difference because they want to measure it over a month. What if I am, having to do something, a project within a week, and I can't get the speed? So it is critical things get defined. We can't predict the future, but we've learned a lot in the last 38 years, or however many years in regards to law, that we've seen things over and over again, and they are told verbally, a lot of things. And it's really, and this is one of the things that we do. We love what we do because we're in the room with our board. So there's a presentation with our provider. When they leave, we tell them, okay, this is what they failed to tell you. This is what you could ask the next time you meet with them to define. And by the way, are they willing to put it in a contract? Whatever they told you they would do. Because there's a lot of places out there that tell you, we're going to bring mega speeds, you don't have to worry about it. And that's not true at the end of the day.
Thank you, Leo. I really appreciate that. Great job, great answer. Now I'd like to ask Leo and Paula if you're prepared to put your slide up with your contact information. We're going to try to do that technologically. I realize it might be a trick, but we'd like to have Leo and Paula share their contact information. So for all of the attendees, get out your pen and paper or take a photograph of the screen and make sure you get contact information for both Leo and Paula as you move forward and consider your contracts and the scope of services that they might be able to help you for. So for Leo Delgado, go ahead and let's have his contact information placed on the screen. Hopefully you all can see that. And Leo, do you want to just go ahead, for those who are listening by phone only, provide your phone number and your email address?
Absolutely. My number, and it's my mobile, so you can reach me at any time. It's 954-410-2820, 954-410-2820. And be happy to help with whatever questions you have. I know there's a lot of questions here, but we're running out of time. And the email is a little bit longer, but I'll say it. It may be difficult, but so call us. But it's ldelgado@convergeservicesinc.com.
Thank you, Leo. And Paula, if you'll share your screen information.
Okay, we got something.
Thank you. So you should be able to see that on the screen. It might be a little small. So the telephone number for Rosenbaum PLLC is 561-653-2900. You can see my email. It's pmara with 2 R's at rosenbaumpllc.com.
Terrific. Thank you, Paula. And my name is Chris Banker. I'm with Patriot Insurance Agency. If there are there are insurance implications, especially when we talk about liability for rooftop installations, et cetera, and we love working with our community associations. So let me go ahead and provide my information as well. It's area code 561-694, and that phone number is missing a digit. It should be 1776. That's 1776. 694-1776, and our website is www.gopatriotinsurance.com. We'd be delighted to assist as well. I want to thank our panelists and all the attendees. What a terrific presentation this was today. I know I am greatly enriched with the information that was provided. Obviously, thank our sponsor, and I'm going to turn this over to Donna to do that in a more formal manner. But I just want to say thank you to Leo and thank you to Paula for a wealth of information. And I leave you with this. Remember that secondhand television I told you I bought? Well, it's only $40. Now, the volume control didn't work, but for $40, even though the volume didn't work, I just couldn't turn it down. Well, there you have it, folks. That is a wrap, and I'd like to hand it over to Donna Hamilton with my great thanks. I'm Chris Banker with Patriot Insurance. Donna Hamilton, president of the Juno Beach Civic Association. Take it away and wrap us up.
You're on mute.
Oh. Donna, can you unmute yourself, please?
Donna, if you would just start over one more time, take it from the top, and we'll be able to hear you. Go right ahead.
Make sure you unmute yourself though first, Donna.
I'm sorry. Good morning. Thank you so much for this wonderful program. It was amazing. I really want to thank our sponsor, Kathy Dorn from Center State Bank, for her continued support throughout the past few years, and also to Kathy Field Lloyd and her team for developing and organizing these programs. And most of all, thank you to our esteemed panel, Leo Delgado and Paula Mara, and our moderator, Chris Banker. I mean, your expertise is so valuable and appreciated and absolutely needed. The Civic Association's mission is to enhance the quality of life in Juno Beach. And we believe in the forum, and we believe in their educational value to provide the shared learning for the homeowners associations. And I especially applaud the homeowners board and their members to take their time and their energy to be informed.
to meet their community and also to provide the property value and maintain their financial stability. So thank you so much. We appreciate you, and the Civic Association wishes you safety, health, and all good wishes. Thank you.
Am I leaving?